Wanted to talk about the Super Bowl with you because I didn't tell you this, Shayne, but I was on a podcast with Jay Sweet, who we've had on the show. He has the Michigan Football Network podcast, and they wanted me to join them for the Super Bowl preview, and they wanted to do best bets and kind of one big outlandish bet. And I thought, okay, I'm representing primarily Shayne Graham's Extra Points with this, not really Sports Intel Ryan, because it was the football show. So I've got to be true to our branding. So I picked all special teams prop bets for my bets.
Oh, I bet you did well.
And I went off of your advice because you were talking on the show for the preview about how Myers is kind of your guy and you really like his form. And I thought, well, okay, between what Shayne told me about that and the fact that this is likely to be maybe a little higher scoring total from the Seattle side. Plus, you might have some bend not break defense from the Patriots. I said Myers is sitting at 7.5. I got to go the over on that.
Yep.
And obviously he hit that in the first half. And then they wanted like a kind of an outlandish bet. What's a bet with a lot better odds? And I said Myers 15 points or more, and he also hit that. So I have to thank you for kind of keying me into that. I also took a Michael Dixon line under 57.5 for his longest punt, and then under 3 touchbacks or under 3.5 touchbacks total between the two teams. So I went all kickers. So I thought you would be proud of me for the emphasis on special teams. If I could have taken a long snapping prop, I would have. I couldn't find one.
Yeah. And it's funny, and I'm sure we'll discuss this a little more, but we'll actually, there are numbers that prove how well the Seattle kicker and punter actually controlled that game. And it's not just points. It's a whole lot of things. But the special teams was a huge factor in that game.
Well, that's why I brought it up. Not really to brag. It's going to seem like I was bragging. I really don't do bets, so that's why I leaned into those. But because of what you told me,
that's called a humble brag.
There you go. Exactly. But that's why I wanted to bring it up because, I mean, I know there were some people out there saying, well, it wasn't a close game, it wasn't a big time offensive game, but I think for special teams fans, this was a great game. It was a lesson in ball control and how, I really enjoyed watching not only Myers, but Dixon control the game the way that he did. He deserves a lot of credit. There were people saying, hey, I bet Myers got votes for MVP with how well he played and how many points he put up, since there weren't maybe a lot of really bombastic offensive performances from the other guys, other than Walker, who ended up winning it. But Dixon, I thought, was worth mentioning just as much as Myers. It's just a hard thing to quantify, as we talk about on the show. But as you talk about a lot, it's one of the most important phases of the game, as far as it's where you can swing the game the most. And if you can control that and not necessarily have the big swing the other way, then you're finding a different way to control the game rather than just running the ball, controlling the time clock, what have you.
Well, let me go ahead and quantify this for you. Okay.
Please do.
I think that Jason and, or Jamie. I think Jamie and Michael should have been co-MVPs. Okay, I think they should have been co-MVPs. I think Myers probably should have had it. In my opinion, but you could have given a co-MVP because the punting game was phenomenal. And you look at the field goals, you see the points, you see the immediate, point transition, all that. But when you look at the punting game, okay. New England punted 8 times. Seattle punted 7 times. New England had 4 yards of return yards. Seattle had 98 yards of return yards. Okay, so 98 minus 4, that's 94 yards of flipped field hidden field position. Okay, that equates into pretty close to almost a touchdown. Because when you think about if you give someone 90 extra yards of offense, that puts you in the end zone from the average starting point, right? So that's a huge thing. And when you can say, I punted one less time than you, and I gave you 4 yards return, everything else was net, pure yardage off the punt. But you punted to me 8 times, one more time, and I returned it almost for a full football field. That is a huge, huge advantage. That's almost as much as blocking a punt. The kind of momentum you get when you block a punt is almost a 100-yard flip in field position, which is one of the most detrimental stats to overcome to win a game if you get a punt blocked. So it was huge, and that's why I think they both should have been MVPs of that game.
I agree, and that's why, I mean, it was fitting that that's what we previewed, because it did end up being, yes, it wasn't a last-second field goal, but it did end up being a key part of that game and a key part of the storyline. But I know when we've talked about kind of the concepts for the show, we talk about how we don't want to only focus on kicking and punting and special teams, but I also think that it's a good specialty for us because I don't hear a lot of other people covering this side of it. Obviously, you can cover it better than 99.9% of the world, but there's also the fact that it just doesn't get enough coverage as a whole, because that really was one of the main storylines to the game. And I read a bunch of articles, I looked at a bunch of coverage from the game, and I only saw a stray mention or two to it throughout the articles. Oh yeah, Myers had a lot of points and what have you, but there really wasn't a lot of good coverage on how dominant the special teams were, and how, yes, it's hard. I think that's one of the key parts. It's hard to quantify. So you have those numbers and that helps, but for a lot of people, it's just, oh, okay, well, Walker ran for this many yards and this guy scored a touchdown. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's why it deserves a little bit more attention too.
Oh, absolutely. And where you start your drive plays into it, because there's a whole set of play calls that come off of that. And it not only determines the play calling that starts the drive, but when you get past that first set of down markers on the first series, beginning of a series, that's a very important play set because so many teams go 3 and out, and it's such a your defense has to come back on the field without getting much of a rest, and then you've got to try to keep the other team from getting their offense working. And then your defense, you're exhausted because you didn't get much time to really rest and recover between the series. And that changes everything when you're given a short field or a shorter field, and you have an advantage of, whether it's 10, 15, 20, 30, whatever it is, you're looking at slants instead of posts, or you're looking at, certain run plays because you've got a little bit more, lack of aggression to be desperate to gain yards. You can let your offense pound on the defense a little bit harder and grind the football a little bit slower and have a little more control of the game. And I think that's the way it works out, is when you see how the special teams really controlled that field position, and Michael was downing 2 punts inside the 5. Starting inside the 5 is like a horrible feeling for the offense to run out onto the field and set up their huddle in their freaking end zone,
Exactly. And like you said, it really determines the play calling. You can't be too aggressive about, okay, let me run a bunch of posts here where we need time for this play to set up, and the quarterback sitting in the end zone waiting to be safetied. You've got to be a lot more conservative. So then the first 2 downs are kind of limited in what you can call. And that's one of the reasons that I did the Michael Dixon under 57.5, because I know he's a great punter, but I also thought that they were going to be in advantageous field position for most of the time. So he did down those 2 within the 5. I didn't make it by much. I think his long was 55, so barely made it on that one. But he's a very good directional kicker from what I've seen. And I was reading, one of the reasons I picked that, you can probably speak to this better, Shayne. I was reading about how he he's not really a hang time guy. He's more of a directional guy, and that led to him not kicking over 57.5 yards very often throughout the season. Not that you speak to that, but the hang time versus directional stuff.
And when you're able to create a little bit of dimension in your coverage, where you make the returner chase the ball versus you just serve it up on a platter, hang it up in the air. Like, yeah, if you get hang time and you get guys down there and he doesn't have much room to move, that's great. But if you make him run laterally, he has to gather his momentum laterally. Then he's got to gather it to accelerate linear. I guess you call it linearly, straight up and down the field. So you have to stop momentum and then restart momentum versus if it's hanging up in the air, you're just waiting for it, you catch it and go. Or you can run forward and catch it, and you can already have your momentum started in the direction that you want, north and south. But if you've got a guy moving east and west, and then he's got to slow that down, and then he's got to redirect it north and south, it's such an advantage, and it's become such a tool in the NFL over the last few years with these punters becoming so talented. And, honestly, you can attribute it to the first Australian punter, Darren Bennett was his name, San Diego Chargers. He was one of the first guys to ever do this pooch punt where you kick the ball end over end and it flops, is what they call it, a flop punt, where you can control the distance a lot better than a guy who would try to, what they would call coffin corner and hit a high ball into the corner. That became such a standard that for the longest time in the NFL, not one punter, and I'm talking till at least 2005. I don't know what year. It might have been 2007, 2008. You can probably look this up. When the first punter had a net average of higher than 40 yards. It didn't happen until I want to say 2007. It could have been 2008. But no punter could do it. You'd have a guy here and there who was at right around 41 and change going into November, December. But all of a sudden that weather hits and you're playing bad weather games and you just lose a few yards here and there with the cold weather and the bad weather and the snow and all that. But when you created the directional punting, when you created the flip-flop punting where the ball is going end over end and typically bounces straight up or bounces backwards instead of forward, it created such a change where you have multiple guys every year netting over 40 yards per punt. And when you had guys grossing 45, 50, whatever they're grossing. I don't know what the numbers have been, but all of a sudden you're getting a net yardage of over 40 yards. That is huge. And it hasn't happened until the 2000s.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to look this up while you were talking, and in typing it in, I'm not getting the net. I'm getting the first one to be over 40 for his career, which was the infamous Ray Guy, but not net yardage. Just his average was 42 something for his career, but that wasn't in net. But yeah, that makes me think of a couple things, because you were talking about the return portion of it and making them move laterally versus having that momentum. And obviously that's going to reduce the amount of yardage on average that they're able to return. But I have to imagine it increases. I don't know that we have a way to quantify this or look this stat up, but I have to imagine it increases the probability of a fumble and a mishandle too, because you're not just able to sit underneath it, which is one of the things that's much harder than people realize, that just the everyday person, better than anybody how that is difficult, just even standing under it as a returner. But if you're moving laterally and also trying to return it or trying to catch it, you're more likely to make a misstep because you're not able to flag it for your teammates that it might end up hitting the gunners or the people blocking, or you're going to mishandle it because you're not in your routine.
Absolutely. And I've seen it firsthand because I've tried to catch punts that are literally coming right down to me, and they're still hard to catch. I mean, when I coach returners, I coach them, hey, if the nose of the leading nose of the ball, so like the front tip of the football that's closest to the returner is up in the air and it's a right-footed punter, the ball's going to break to your right. If the ball turns over and the nose is down, that means the ball's going to break to the left. So it's going to have a little different curve at the end of the flight. Just like when a quarterback throws a spiral, the ball typically, if on a high ball, the nose will start to turn a little to the outside of the hand that's thrown it with. So the same thing happens when you punt the football. So if that nose turns over and that spiral continues that Bernoulli effect, it starts to lead that ball off to the right. But if it just spirals but the nose doesn't turn over, that ball's going to flutter and it's going to drift back inside to the left as the punter looks at it. So the returner has to understand that. Now, when you start throwing in hitting line drives or flop punts or what they call utility or golf club, golf bag punts, what that means is, so Sam Cook, who was a very talented punter who retired just a few years ago, is known. There's actually a great YouTube clip where he talks about it. I think he says he has 14 punts in his bag, which is, ironically enough, the number of clubs you're allowed to keep in your golf bag. But he talked about how he had these low liners or where he'd walk to the right and punt it back to the left or whatever. And it was to keep the ball out of the returner's hands and not let them just have it served up on a platter. So a lot of these Aussie guys have figured it out and everyone else is learning and adapting to it. And they're seeing that if I can get the ball where the returner has to struggle to catch it just to get to it, then he still has to secure it within his hands. And it's not easy. I remember when I played for the Saints in New Orleans, we shared a parking lot with the, what's the NBA team there? Pelicans?
The Pelicans, yep.
Okay, so they parked in the same parking lot as us. They had their own building. We had our building. But there was a turf field right outside of the building. And they would come out and try to catch punts. Thomas Morstead was punting, and these guys would all come out, okay? And we're talking like the superstars of their team. The guy with the eyebrows, can't remember his name. He was one of them.
Anthony Davis.
Yeah. Those guys were trying to catch punts. They couldn't do it. And these guys were world-class elite athletes. And they couldn't judge the way the ball was moving in the air to catch it. So it's a challenge, and it's a skill that you have to learn and develop. But when you get punters that learn how to manipulate that the ball moves even more, it makes it such a challenge. And that's what a guy like Michael Dickinson's able to do is kind of be almost like a Navy SEAL level, like elite level of what he does.
That was so information dense. There's a lot of great stuff in there. I love that you brought up the Bernoulli principle too. We're now learning about physics here from the special teams segment. I would also like to highlight for anybody that was saying, well, why is Shayne calling him the guy with the eyebrows? Anthony Davis literally tried to ensure his unibrow when people, because you can probably relate to this, Shayne, not that I want you to tell any stories in this category. I know they're classified, but there's hazing and stuff that goes on, or you get rookies to run your errands or whatever. And that's pretty common in basketball. And I'm sure there's some of that goes on in football, but they were threatening to shave his unibrow so that he had the regular eyebrows, and he was threatening to get insurance on it so that wouldn't happen.
I did not know that, but that is very interesting to know. I guess if he becomes what do you call that, a bio-brow? I don't know what the term would be for that, for normal. Yeah. But that's interesting. You know what, though? Hazing used to be a thing. The NFL really cut down on it because it got a little out of hand. I remember when I was a freshman in college, we all got our heads shaved. All the veterans came in on their reporting day because the freshmen had already been in for like 3 days. And then the veterans came in, and we had a team meeting that night. Well, they all showed up in the dorms, and they were walking around with hair clippers, and they would just walk around and just bully the crap out of everybody and put you in a bear hug, and somebody just buzzed one stripe down the middle of the top of your head, so then you were forced to finish it.
Yeah, and that's where that stuff can kind of go too far. I think if you would know better than me, Shayne, but I think the modern day version of that is like, hey, you've got to go out and get all of our treats that we like, or you've got to get the food order, things like that are somewhat tame. They wouldn't even really be considered hazing. It's more like
there's always the rookie from each position group when you get on the plane for an away game that's carrying the huge plastic bags from like Popeye's Chicken or somewhere that the veterans were like, you got to bring, all of us like this or whatever. And then they also get the guys on what they call rookie dinner night, where they go somewhere and they run the tab up on purpose, and they make the rookies pay for the tab kind of congruently with what their draft status was. So, like, if you were the first-round draft pick, you're probably paying $1,000 on the tab. If you're a second and third, all the way down the line, it was kind of a prorated type system. But they definitely used to, find their ways around the physical hazing, and it kind of became monetary.
Yeah, at least it got more tame because, once you start dealing with, like you're talking about shaving or somebody, physical stuff, like you said, that can get a little bit too aggressive. So it's probably good they toned it down. And you can still have fun with that other stuff, and that's not too bad. But yeah, great stuff on the special teams. I'm glad we highlighted that because, like I said, there's not a lot of shows talking about that part of the Super Bowl and of football in general, and so we will continue to do that here, and we'll have more kickers and specialists on the show. Hopefully, we can get some punters too on the show, Shayne. I'm sure you've got some connections there, but we'll have to get some punters. It'd be fun to talk some punting.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got quite a few guys we'll be able to get on there, and we'll have a good time with it.
But I'm excited about next week's interview for the Declassified series because we've got your buddy Owen Hansen coming on, and that's going to be a good interview next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can't wait.
So Shayne will be back in studio for that episode here, and we'll talk with Owen, and we'll also have Josh Quapo on talking about the Lions contract situation. So that'll be a good episode. But have a good trip on the road here, Shayne, and we'll look forward to your return next week.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Shayne. Talk to you soon.
All right.